Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Rod Francis. I'm the Planning Director with the Town of Brattleboro. Welcome to our fourth panel in the series of panels organised by the Core Arts Project, our so-called Track 2 of this NEA Core Arts, the NEA Our Town project. We've been the recipients of a federal grant to discuss and work on the question of arts and placemaking. And for those of you who are new to this stage of the program, we've been holding conversations here in the Latchis now on topics of importance to the broader community around the question of the role of the arts community and the role of Brattleboro as a place of artistic endeavour and activity. And today's session is on the question of cooperation and collaboration and in particular lessons from the field. One of the themes that has emerged several times and in different ways is the need to facilitate closer cooperation and collaboration among artists in the community, and then between the arts sector more generally and other sectors present. So here we would mean municipal government and the state, and facilitating a stronger dialogue and interaction between the arts sector and commercial life in Brattleboro, and also those things that we hold dear, including the quality of life present in Brattleboro. So to help us work through questions of collaboration and cooperation here today, we have three panelists, starting from my right and working away further. We have John Davis from Minnesota, Mary Jenkins from Massachusetts, and Steve Proctor, as you all know, is a local. John Davis is the Executive Director of the Lanesboro Arts Center in Minnesota, where he's been since 2000. John has been responsible in many ways for bringing the national attention to Lanesboro, which is regarded as one of the premier small town arts destinations in the United States, as sometimes Brattleboro gets referred to as well. John has more than 20 years in the field, is an artist in his own right, and specializes in the question of rural economic development and the arts. Next to John, we have Mary. Mary has been with the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and in particular is the program manager of the Adams Arts Program for the Creative Economy and the Massachusetts Cultural Districts Initiative. Mary's also been there since 2000 and has worked extensively with communities across Massachusetts in the area of cultural activity and tourism, and she's here to share her regional experiences with us. And then last but not least, we have Steve, who's been here, as I found out last night, almost since he left college, about 30 years, and has had extensive experience in the management of local arts institutions. He's been a consultant for a considerable period of time and worked with arts organizations on their mission. And he also is a classical guitarist and potter of wildly large ceramics. So, welcome everybody. Just a quick housekeeping details. There are bathrooms in the lobby. We're a bit busy here today. This is the Latchis, and we've got two other events that are organised, being conducted here, so it's a little busier than normal. The way we're going to play it out is there's food and coffee over here that you can help yourself to at any time. We're going to be fairly relaxed. Our panelists today, the first two, are going to present us with lots of images and ideas from afar via a very funky town projector, and then Steve is just going to talk. At any point, so what we'll try and do is let the panelists get through their first part of their presentation, try and hold your questions until the end, and then we hope to open it up and have a dialogue between the audience and the panelists, and in fact actually encourage the panelists to interrogate each other about their experiences and insights and that way we hope to get the most out of it. So, with no more questions or issues, let's start with John. Thank you.
Well, thanks, and thanks so much for inviting me here. And I had a bit of an adventure getting here, but it's just wonderful to be here this morning. Just a little bit of background about myself, too. I went to art college, went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, studied design and fine arts. I think the class that had the most impact with those two very different fields was a class called Creative Problem Solving. And I didn't really, I think, recognize the impact until several years later of how important that is as a strategy just moving forward with life and challenges in general. I live in Lanesboro, Minnesota. The population is 750 approximately. Before that, I lived in New York Mills, Minnesota, population of about 1,000. And I'll be kind of talking about my experiences in those two small communities. There'll be some facts and factoids that I'll be sharing, but primarily I'm a storyteller, so there'll be some images. I'll try to tell stories and keep things within our 15 to 20 minutes here. But kind of starting off, there's just some basics of like how-to and philosophies that I have in doing work. So, and I have sort of these five ingredients. Vision, what's the big picture? I think so often people, you lose the forest to the trees. What's the vision? What's the big picture? Big believer in that. Philosophies, what are the principles behind the work that you're doing? Sometimes people forget how important that is. Creativity, again, creative problem solving. How can problems become opportunities? How can you redefine risk? Strategy, planning. I think it's so important to have the right strategy moving forward, knowing when to go around brick walls versus trying to go through them. And then will. A lot of people have this and get things done just with this portion alone. Again, my personal philosophy, access to the arts builds community. Programs should be designed to integrate the arts and to get community buy-in. If you have that as a philosophical component, how can you have a program that also gets community buy-in at the same time? And the audience is everyone. If you have that as a premise, I don't mean you literally have to program for every single person in a community. It's just if your mindset is that, how do you approach the arts and arts programming? And in a town of 1,000 or 750, you can't afford to be, well, the demographic is X. What if the demographic is everyone? If you have to program for farmers, the business person, for teachers, for kids, what does that look like? When I moved to New York Mills, this was the farmhouse that I got. It was a fixer-upper that had no doors, no windows, no plumbing, and no electricity. But other than that, it was just great. I moved to New York Mills after graduating from art school, and it was primarily just I wanted to live out in the country. I had a dream of doing that in the arts somehow, and the first year I lived there, I think I made $3,000 just painting barns and houses to survive. People in the community got to know me not as an arts person, but as the guy that would go and climb up on a ladder and paint their barns. What happened was that after conversations with community members, I found out that there was just a lack of access to the arts. And so I wanted to figure out a creative way to make that possible. So I thought, well, how can I do that? How could maybe bring artists to the small town to have a win-win situation that could be created? So a friend gave me a toy plastic tractor, and everything kind of came together. The tractor would be the logo for a nonprofit organization. I'd form a board of directors from local artists and townspeople, and that's how the project would work. And so 3 years later, the New York Mills Arts Retreat was formed, and its first artist in residence happened. Again, I can't stress the importance of starting off an arts organization with the residency program, because the town really had no access to the arts. There was no art gallery. There was limited access to art in the schools, no elementary art teacher, no high school art teacher. So we just simply crafted a program that was unique. Why do an arts colony? Why do everything that another community is already doing? So I thought, why not do something unique? So one artist at a time would create a proposal to work with the community. And those proposals would then be selected based upon their compatibility with the community. This is an example of one artist who wanted to work with farmers. She worked with over a dozen area farmers to collect old discarded farm implement parts and created a gateway sculpture fence for the Cenex co-op in town, which farmers were a part of. This is a farm family that was one of the donors for the project. It's okay. Another example is in New York Mills with the gallery there was a fish decoy exhibit. How do you create access to the arts? Well, fish decoys were really popular. This was not viewed as an arts project by the State Arts Board at the time in Minnesota. I thought, well, what does this have to do with art? This is like craft or decoy. This isn't art. I really wasn't too bothered with what's art and what's not art. I was interested in how do you engage people with something creative. And now, many years later, 20 years later, fish decoys are definitely considered a form of art and craft and very well respected. But this exhibit, actually, we got, I think, over 150 people for the opening of it, and sold a lot of the decoys from the exhibit. But it was just a great way to get people from outside of the community to come into the building to see what it was about and engage with the community in the arts. In Lanesboro, one of the most successful exhibits was called Steering. It was an exhibition with the local sales barn. The sales barn is basically a livestock auction. I approached the owner about doing an exhibit basically to showcase this business in the community creatively. And he said, no, absolutely not. We don't want some arts thing. It's going to be like an expose. And then I realized that I wasn't the right person to do that ask. So I had a community member who'd been there their whole life ask. And then 3 months later, I did another ask. And once he understood, we really want to honor what it is that you're doing. And a lot of people in town don't even know what you do. So we had 3 regional photographers do a slice of what it's like to work in the sales barn. We partnered with the Minnesota Cattlemen's Association and the Fillmore County Cattlemen's Association, Minnesota Beef Council. We had close to 300 people at the opening. They grilled steaks out in front of the gallery. It was just absolutely a phenomenal exhibit. And we had people looking at art that had never looked at art before. And the first piece sold was from the owner of the Lanesboro Sales Commission. A photo. And again, the importance of partnerships is integrating the arts into community infrastructure. I don't want to just go through every single part there, but in New York Mills, one of the challenges was at one point the arts became so successful there were more jobs and people in the community. And the economic developer in town I would actually fight with sometimes because he wanted to only stack up things that had to do with industry and not really the character of the community. So I think it's really important to have that balance of what's the character of your community, what does the community want, and how the arts can benefit in a creative way that community. This was an example of another artist in residence who worked with us in the city partnering to create a sculpture fence, a 900-foot long sculpture fence that the city actually commissioned that had individual corn cobs that students and community members had a chance to make their own individual corn cob for the fence. It was a great community project. That's just one example of the sculpture fence and sculptures from local, regional, and national artists that were in the sculpture park. In Lanesboro, one of our partnerships was with the city to create public art. There was an artist who submitted a proposal. We also worked with Forecast Public Art, which is sort of a nationally known public arts organization. We worked with the city to create medallions. Each medallion, large medallion, represented a different part of the community. So there was history, there was environment, there was education. So we engaged community members from each of those segments to participate in the arts. And each community member contributed something to the medallion. So this was one for the environment. You can see a fish and other things there. And people had a chance to make their own small medallions to take home as well. This is a local artist who now is starting to become nationally famous, Carl Unash. This is a stained glass tractor. He also was commissioned to create signs in the community as well. So when I say stained glass tractor, you have different connotations, but he has a piece in Wisconsin right now that's a stained glass combine. This is pretty amazing work. Again, the strategies of community arts and building engage local people local leaders, not necessarily arts leaders, from the library, from civic organizations. Again, some of our best partnerships have been non-arts organizations. Our arts organization volunteers at the local fish fry at the Legion, so we help fry fish. But people from the Legion then say, okay, well, arts people, they're willing to work hard and fry fish, serve fish. Again, in New York Mills, partnering with the city, we had the city invest $35,000 into an abandoned building that was then turned into a cultural center. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but in 1990 it was the equivalent of Minneapolis giving about $13 million to a project. We simply just redefined what the risk was. The risk wasn't giving money, the risk was doing nothing. So once they realized that, it's like, well, if you do nothing, you're going to have a vacant lot instead of investing in an 1885 building that's your last brick building on Main Street. That's original. So the city, and to kind of back up, New York Mills is a Finnish community. When I moved there, there are still signs in Finnish. So it's very much like Missouri, show me. And so having that kind of sort of mutual respect and just framing questions that you speak in economic development terms if you're talking to a city council. You can speak in arts terms when talking with arts organizations. So sometimes just knowing how to speak the right language for the people that you're talking to. And again, these are just some facts and figures from New York Mills. One of the things that we did with the local city government was just to actually track economic development, and that's something that in 1990 people weren't doing. So we wanted to track jobs, we wanted to track economic data, so we had a baseline survey the year before the center opened and then 5 years after it opened, and we're able to track that data. And it received national attention, not just from the arts part, but from the economic development part as well. And again, in Lanesboro, I moved there in 2000 after I completed my work in New York Mills. I mentioned the importance of a vision, and what's more important or maybe even more powerful than a single vision is a shared vision and how to go about doing that. In Lanesboro, we worked with the city and also the chamber to build a culture that appreciated the arts. And part of that is just talking to community members, to city members about their strategic plans. So when the city was going to redo their long-range plan, we were involved in that process so that the arts were a key component of that strategic planning. Same with the Chamber of Commerce. I actually served and helped create the Chamber of Commerce in Lanesboro in 2001. So it's important to have integrated activity with the arts, with civic organizations as well, and to help, if you can, be involved in their planning processes as well, because there can be so much overlap that really rises the tide of all organizations involved. And again, the Lanesboro Area Chamber of Commerce, part of their mission now and part of their vision statement is to be a premier arts and culture destination. So that's what they work towards in partnership with the city and in partnership with the Arts Center and the professional theater company in town as well called Commonwealth Theater. When I first moved to Lanesboro, I proposed an arts campus, just a different way of looking at the arts. When I approached people in the community, they thought, well, that's an intriguing idea. What's an arts campus? I said, well, instead of putting everything in one building, what if the whole town becomes the arts center? What would that look like? So people were like, well, that sounds like a really fascinating idea. So I went to my board of directors. I went to the Art Council's board of directors. There were 3 arts organizations, by the way, in 2000 in Lanesboro, and to the Commonwealth Theater. And the result was unanimous when I talked with the arts organizations. Every single one rejected the idea. So the existing vision, move all assets to one facility. New vision, whole town becomes an art center, things are connected. So I like to say this idea took 8 years to be somebody else's idea. And sure enough, when the economy crashed in 2008, I brought up this idea again and said, we know, if we merged with the 2 small arts organizations, the Art Council and what was then Cornucopia Art Center, what do you think about this? And someone said, what about this arts campus? What if we did that? I'm like, that's a great idea. Let's look at doing that. So we had joint board meetings. It was a 2-year process, and in 2010, the two small organizations merged. We started a capital campaign in 2012 for the Arts Campus project. And again, the Arts Campus goals, I just don't want to read off of a slide, you can do that, but it's really about that interconnectivity. And it's about connecting people, places, and spaces. So when I was working in New York Mills, it was before the term creative placemaking was coined, and I think terms can be overused in cycles in arts programming and so forth, but it's something that I really believe in, that you have to have connections between public places, and public art and spaces. You need to connect those to real human beings and people, because that's really what it's all about. And again, the vision is it's made up of buildings that house the arts and public spaces, and walkways defined by the arts. So here's some of the Arts Campus components. Poetry parking lot. One of the challenges of Lanesboro, which is a destination now, is that people don't park in the parking lot. You drive down into the community, and this has been a problem for the community for a long time. People want to park on Main Street, and there's just no place to park, and they won't park there. Well, so I proposed to the chamber, it's like, well, what if we turned the parking lot into an arts destination itself and had poetry there? And so, okay, well, it's not going to cost that much. We'll do all the fundraising for it. We'll do all the planning for it. And so it's in the design part right now of how to integrate poetry through poetry posts, poetry on the pavement, and signage to get people to park there. And then once you're parked at the poetry parking lot, next slide, you go through an underpass. And you say, what does an underpass have to do with art? We actually worked with the county, and it took 2 years to get this done, to have a safe connection between the parking lot to a historic walking bridge. The space between them is a Gateway Sculpture Park. It's just a green space, but we've been calling it the Gateway Sculpture Park for 10 years, so now people are just waiting for the little pieces that go into it. So we're actually going to be turning this into a amphitheater, because it's also in a floodplain. So there's little that you can do since it's right next to the river. So you need to work with the DNR. So we're partnering with the DNR so to have a natural amphitheater that can be created. Because one of the things we found out is people just will go there and have a picnic, and fish. This connects to a historic walking bridge, which, again, I've worked with other community leaders to help raise money to restore it. It's an 1892 walking bridge that was falling apart and was going to be dismantled. It was the gateway to the community. And again, I found a local person who'd been there their whole lives to work with strategically to get it renovated and fixed up. And it's one of the key components of the Arts Campus, because now it connects to parking lot, to green space sculpture area, to the downtown where the art gallery is, and theater. St. Main Theater, we're turning into residency center upstairs, and it's a small theater compared to this. It's a 120-seat theater. Next slide. Oh, just back one slide. Sorry. And the historic gallery building, too. So we have our current residency center up above. We've got 2 apartments. The gallery right now, oops. Sorry. That's okay. We have over 100 artists that exhibit in the gallery. Our organizational budget is about $350,000 a year. We sell about $130,000 worth of art from about 100 different artists. We have about 8 exhibits a year. In the St. Main, we have about 40 to 50 different musical events and films a year. We do classes and workshops, again, all to get the community engaged in the process. We also have right next door to the St. Main Theater, the Commonweal Theater, which is a 180-seat theater, which was finished in 2007. Next slide. Right now, we're almost done with our capital campaign. It's a $1.1 million project to, again, animate and put artwork into the spaces that I've just talked about in terms of the Arts Campus. It's a $1.1 million project. We're at about $800,000. We received a huge grant last year from Art Place America to help bring this vision to life. And we've also raised over $150,000 just locally from individuals. just a quote. It's also a biblical quote as well, but it's just, I think for me, emphasizes the importance of vision. So often, people are working on their individual projects, and they don't realize that part of a strategy of having a shared vision, if you looked at that as a goal, how much stronger a community can be and how much more the arts could be part of everyone's lives. You can create win-win situations. So I'm a big believer in creating those win-win situations, and that's the story. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So now we're going to move along to Mary.
Thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you for turning out this morning. I'm actually really impressed. Starting a conversation like this at 9:30 on a Saturday morning could feel like a struggle, and I had 2 cups of coffee before I kind of could put 2 words together. So it's probably pretty evident to you right away that I'm not from here, and I'm not from Massachusetts, but I've lived in the United States for more than 25 years, on and off, and I've had the privilege of working with communities across Massachusetts, and I was born and raised in a large city, but I've come to love small communities, and the reason for that is because for me, they're the epitome of what quality of life is really all about. And that's the interconnectedness of the people that live there. And it's the relationships you have and you own and the place you call home that I see brought forward again and again. That's the passion all of us have, whether or not we've lived in a community for all our lives or we've lived in a community for just a few months. We are all seeking a place we call home. And we are all seeking a place where we can be in our families and with our friends and with the people we love. And to that, we bring community. So, I have some questions for you because you know a bit about me and I don't know anything about any of you, apart from the folks I sat down and had dinner with. I did come in yesterday afternoon and I wandered about a bit to see what I could find. And it was like, wow, what is this? I hadn't been here before. Because, working in Massachusetts, you don't crossing the border, that border that exists. And you've got a lot of borders. You've got New Hampshire, and you're in Vermont, and you've got Massachusetts to the south, and here is Brattleboro. And I loved the fact that, when you come off the highway, you come off number 1. So it's like entering into number 1 Vermont, or exit 1 Vermont. I mean, it's like, why go anywhere else but Brattleboro? So, and when I got here, there was all these things to do, and it's delightful. It's completely delightful. So the question is sort of what story do you want to tell? But before we go there, who the heck are you? So, how many of you have lived here all your lives? All your lives, pretty much 30 plus years, all your life?
All my life.
All your life? Okay, how many of you have lived here for 30 plus years? Okay. And how many 20 plus years? 10 years? 5 years? This year? Okay. All right. So for those of you who have lived here for 30 plus years, or all your lives, you're really expert in this community. You know its ups and downs, you know the things that have worked, and you know a little bit about the things that haven't gone so well. You've seen a lot of things come and go, and a lot of efforts take place, and businesses open and close. So just, it's an ebb and flow, just like the river on which you sit. For those of you who arrived here, you probably put a stake in the ground looking for a way of life that you weren't getting someplace else, or circumstance brought you here because there was work, and you wanted to raise a family here, and you have. And they may still be here, or they may be someplace else. But they come back here to visit, and it's still the place they connect to. When I go back to England, I immediately stop being a foreigner. I can walk down my main street and I feel completely at home. I meet my brother or my sister and we have a track record and a history that nobody else knows about. And that's just the way it is. And that's part of what being in a family is about. And that's the same in community, you know, with your neighbors next door, with the people down the street, with the people you sit with on committees. All of that is sort of relevant. What happens often, though, is we forget to tell our stories. And we forget to bring the passion that we bring, what we have in our lives, forward in the conversation. And one of the reasons we do this is because, well, I'll get into this a bit later. But first of all, I want to kick off by saying this, to me, is meaningful. This is a man that has been an extraordinary beacon for all of us for the last 50 years plus. And I particularly like this quote, because I think it sort of speaks to the heart of what collaboration is all about, or working together is all about. And that is, how do you get at some of the problems? And how do you get at it in a way that is not just about, well, we've done that, we've tried that, we've been there before. How do you maintain the tenacity and the endurance and the goodwill to kind of get at what the issues are? And do that in a way where people's voices are listened to, even if you've heard their voices over and over again, but you really take that on board and say, yes, we can do what we've set out to do. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of communities in Massachusetts. And I'm only using these as not to sort of say they're doing anything better than you. They're just doing some things that I think might be interesting for you to consider. And as you look at these pictures, one of the things, two things will occur to you. We have that here already. I mean, that will come across, I think. And then the other thing is, well, if they're doing this, how would we want to do what we're doing? Perhaps configured in a somewhat different way. How do we stand out from the crowd? In a very busy world, in a world where there's a lot of white noise, what does it mean to adapt, adopt, rethink, reimagine our community at this point in time? And how do the arts and cultural community in our community help us focus this effort? So can you just put your hands up if you work in an arts organization? Okay. And how many of you, could you put your hands up if you're an artist? Okay. Thank you. So, there's a word I like to use in Italian, the Italian word I like to use called, and I never get this right, because I love this, the way it rolls around my mouth, which is travasiamo, which means crossing over. And it's when someone who is in economic development crosses over to meet you as the artist you are, and works to understand what it means to create that dance, that piece of music, that piece of artwork. And vice versa. John is the epitome of somebody who's crossed over. And he still manages to do what he's doing. And in there, you foster a deeper understanding of how to do this. So we're going to move through some slides really quickly, because I can't see. This is East Hampton. East Hampton is a little community. It's about 18,000 people. When I think about Brattleboro, you've got a population of just over 12,000 people, but if you include the sort of little towns around you, you're probably about the same size as East Hampton. And East Hampton at the moment is a little engine that could. Next slide. They do all kinds of stuff, including sort of pop-up kind of, this band came together out of nothing. And now they play at sort of lots of festivals and events, and they change around, and, you know, it's pretty informal. They have musicians come and go, and they make a lot of noise. And a lot of noise is a good thing in a community. This is a bear. These are obviously bears. These bears were painted by artists that were brought in all over Massachusetts, actually, for a festival. This little community raised $60,000 for its local business community to do this festival. And they've continued to do it since. And it draws hundreds of people. And the reason I think I'm very fond of this festival is because actually what it did at the point where people became engaged and involved in it. And they were very clever about the way they did it. They did a party when the bears arrived. They were naked, white, unpainted bears. They arrived on a truck. There were little bears and big bears, so the little bears got painted by all the school kids and the big bears got painted by artists. They all had a theme and a name, so that you could adopt a bear as a community member. I got a letter from a mother of 2 children who moved to the community 10 years ago. And they'd been trying to make it sort of make sense. She told me that in the letter her husband had become unemployed about 5 years after they'd moved there, and it had been a struggle, and they had been talking about leaving, and then the Bear Festival happened. And she said that this community makes sense to me, and this is the place I want to stay. And my children fell in love with Ursa Bear, and that was it. So, you know, what we're doing here is always driving to the heart of the matter, to what people really care about. So, next slide. So there are lots of artists. They've all drifted into East Hampton because they couldn't afford Northampton anymore. And that's Northampton's problem, which they're working on right now. But there they are. Initially, a lot of the artists in the community sort of said, what do you mean you want us to kind of get involved in community and economic development? We don't do that. We do a lot of other things, but we don't do that. But, you know, the conversation with patience and good intent, that conversation has sort of really taken off. And there are, in this particular building, there are about 65 artists clustered. They're just work studios. They're not live studios. Next slide. And there are all sorts of artists. You might recognize the kind of work you do. Next slide. Next slide. Next one. They also have a school here for architectural woodworking. So they're bringing in sort of local kids, youth, to train them in some of the skills, artisan skills. Next slide. Next slide. And for all sorts of people. This is an organization called Riverside Studios, which runs a school for brain-based people who have brain-based challenges, who produce artwork and sell it in the community, actually. Next slide. And this is a mill looking for artists. It's just been bought, literally, when I took this photograph. This was about 12 months ago, and this is in the heart of the district, and it was the last one to go. And they were waiting for somebody to turn up, to take it over, deal with some of the issues, and move it forward. And 2 months ago, it was sold, and it's on the move. And it will be populated by artists, because there isn't a building in Massachusetts that hasn't been developed, that's been targeted for artists, that hasn't been filled. Next slide. And there are all sorts of places to eat, just like there are here, great places to eat. Next slide. And there are a lot of opportunities to buy work by local artists. There's a commitment on the part of some of the galleries to be able to present local work. It's really important. Craft work and fine art and so on. Next slide. Next slide. This is a kind of cool place. This is a little cinema that shows independent film that a young woman set up in a storefront. And you go in and you can sit in lounge chairs and watch movies. It's small. You can only fit about 60 people into the cinema. And they show all sorts of wacky stuff that you wouldn't necessarily see through Netflix or whatever. So, and they really do serve popcorn. And these are kind of like, these are little businesses like dance schools, have often been in the community for a long time. They're an important backdrop. They provide another outlet for our kids to be able to move about that doesn't involve actually playing with a ball, or at night, but, you know. Next slide. Murals. Murals change place. Murals can alter the way we experience a place. They don't necessarily have to stay in place forever.
there are a number of communities that have done this and done this extraordinarily well. I've been very impressed with the way that Baltimore has adopted there's a young artist there called Gaia, who has done a project called Open Walls, and he sees buildings as paintings, the opportunity to paint on a building instead of a canvas. Next slide. So there are enough artists now for there to be an art supply store. That's a really good signal to me that there's a quantum mass. That business could not survive unless there was a number of artists in the community. Next slide. And this is an interior design store, and this is a fellow who runs it. And at the back of all these businesses and all these efforts are the people that run them. Next slide. There's also some quirky stuff. There happens to be this incredible felting company. This woman went to Turkey, learned how to felt, came back, and she's running this school. If you walk in there, even if you've never done felting in your life, you want to. It's that kind of place. You just want to do it. It just appeals to you. Next slide, bookstores. Bookstores, I think, are sort of like libraries. They help to root a place. You can go and sit, you know, if you've got the kind of bookstore where you can go in and they don't mind, they have an armchair and you can sit down and read the poetry book, or you can read a book, or they have community events, or they bring writers. You know, writers are often not very visible in our communities. You have a literary festival here, but it's an important, the literary piece, the scribing of our lives is an important piece too. Next slide. Architecture. You can take working architecture and retain it. And it took a while. This was drab and horrible and not painted, and you know. But it now becomes a place where, the arcade over that store. That's when you'll be in the heart of downtown. When you arrive here, you'll know it. Next slide. So, and stores and towns are full of quirky places too. The custom bike store. It's not a creative economy business, but it's a reason to come downtown. It's a kind of different sort of, create the bike that you never thought you'd own. Next. So this is cool. You can buy a guitar here, and they also have a bar. So a bar. So you can drink here too. And people come and play music here. So it's a sort of 3-in-1 experience. And it's a really cool place. So again, this is the kind of place you walk in and you think, I've never played a guitar, or I used to play a guitar when I was in college, and I used to play Cat Stevens over and over again, right? Or whatever. Or, pull it down a sort of 30 years and choose whatever, right? So, yes, so you stand there and you go, I want to play the guitar, because they look so beautiful. Anyway, next slide. Tattoos. Body work at the moment is sort of an important backdrop to what's going on in America. Tats, and showing them off. I work with a guy who, from here down, is as sort of straight as he wears a suit. Underneath that, he has a very grown-up job, and you would not expect this man to be decorated from head to foot, from neck down. It's pretty cool. Anyway, next. And these are the people that have been involved. And these people have been working on this whole shebang in East Hampton for the last 5 years. And what I want to point out here is they're still smiling. At the top of the table is the mayor. Now, recently the mayor left. He decided he'd been in place for about 15 years, and he's decided not to run again. So they've got a new mayor. So they're feeling a little fragile around the edges because political transitions bring new people on board. People want to do different things. How do you kind of continue a strategy when there's some change afoot? It makes things a little uncertain, and so on and so forth. But to his whatever, on the left-hand side is his economic development person. But the rest of the people around the table are artists. So this conversation has had the conversation has been around, okay, so if we see the arts as a major piece in our economic development, our community development, the sort of future of this place, and we want to continue to tap into the rich vein of who we are as a community, and then we want to attract people from someplace else because they have money to spend, then how do we do that? And how do we help each other? And what do I need to understand about what you want as opposed to what I want? And how do we meet in the middle? So it's not only what you do or what I do, it's what we do together. Next slide. I'm going to move on to Newburyport. How many people have been to Newburyport? Well done, thank you so much. They'll be pleased. I'll tell them. Newburyport is a seaside community of about 28,000 people, so it's slightly larger than you guys. Next slide. And it's one of those sort of timeless, quintessential New England communities. And that in and of itself is sort of a blessing and a curse, because there's a lot of quintessential New England communities, post-industrial mill towns, who are marketing themselves as being that. So what do you do with that? You know, and when you're flipping through, if you're somebody visiting from Ireland, you say, okay, I'm looking for the quintessential post-industrial mill town in New England. It's like, and what shoots up is like 500 communities. It's like, oh my God, how do I choose? And not just disappear into Lowell. So, next slide. They have a heritage trail, sort of based on their maritime history. You have a trail here, correct? Several, actually. You have a lot of recreational opportunities here in the surrounding community, from what I gather. Next slide. People come here. People like coming here. They like lingering here. There's a lot of shopping experience to be offered here. Next slide. There's again, their maritime history informs the organizations that are present in the downtown. So the maritime history is really important. But this museum went into the doldrums in a big way, and it was only because of community people who said, this is important, and the way we tell our story is important to us. So we want to come back together, and we want to figure out how we support this organization and get it back on its feet so it can take its place in terms of community life and also as part of fitting into the destination profile that we want to use to appeal to people from someplace else. Next slide. So helping people figure out how to get around once they get there. You know, when you arrive in a community, you go, okay, I'm here. So how do I find anything? You know, we know. We're the experts in our own community. We find our way around. Visitors don't. Although it gets better and better because most of them can use a smartphone. I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. Antiques. Things that are from the way past. Things that were made by artisans and craftsmen from a while ago. When someone is visiting a place, what they're doing is creating a memory. They're borrowing what you have on a day-to-day basis for a little while. And oftentimes they want to take something that will remind them of the fact that they were in that place. Next slide. So, sunsets over the harbour. You know, the sunset over the harbour, you can market sunsets over the harbour. Okay. Or you can market sunsets over the hill, which is what you have here. So, this is also part of the wayfinding that they've done. So, again, it's a question of moving people continually around the community. And the reason to do that is simply because the easier it is to navigate, the longer someone will stay. And the longer they stay, the more money they will spend. And money is important. Money is not a dirty word. For those of you in business in this community, and I would say that's pretty much the majority of people in this room, your bottom line, your ability to survive and participate in this community is an imperative. We all have to have a roof over our head. We all have to have food to eat. We all need to be able to take care of our families. So, you know, you can't put that one off the table. You know, you might not want to talk about it as economic development, but your bottom line here is the thing that sort of should drive some of this conversation. Next slide. So they have a park. You have parks. They do things in the park. They have lots of concerts outdoors in the summer. So when I talk to communities, sometimes we talk about what happens here in the winter and what happens here in the summer. What's different? What's the difference in the experience that someone would have if they came here and wanted to hang out for the weekend? Next slide. So they have lots of walking about. Walkability is sort of fundamental in communities. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And they have an art centre in what was a former fire station, which is why it's called the Firehouse, no surprise. This was also an organisation that's seen ups and downs. There's been a change of leadership. There's been a change in terms of the board of that organisation. Sometimes it's had big ambitions. Sometimes its ambitions have been tiny. Sometimes it's been shuttered. But right now, there seems to be the energy and focus to kind of help invigorate that organisation. And that's an important backdrop. These all, I see that. I see the cultural organisations and in communities like this is often small cultural organisations scattered around the community. As John was saying, there isn't a big marquee place. They to me are sort of emeralds in a community, and all the artists are the pearls that exist in this place. And the question is how you put the necklace together. Next slide. So here's the thing about working collaboratively. It's not easy. It's really hard work. So for those sort of people clustered around that table, smiling, that wasn't all of them. That was the core group that meet. And I should say that those people meet for 3 hours every 2 weeks to talk about what they're going to do next. They talk about what they have done, how it went. They celebrate what they did well, and they move on, and then they focus on what they're going to do next. And they have done that for 5 years, continually for 5 years. They have embraced other people. They have about 40 people involved in the collaboration, but they don't all meet at the same time. So they get together to discuss, they get together to sort of make decisions. They're the folks that have the time and to sit at the table. And then they figured out how to communicate that to the remaining 30 people that can't be in the room for a variety of reasons, but are working towards the same, are familiar with the goals, are familiar with the strategies, and are working towards achieving the same thing. So it doesn't make the work easier, but I think it makes the work much better than it would be if you were trying to do it by yourselves. There's power in numbers. The question is how you get at the conversation. Next slide. So, and here's the thing too that sometimes happens. So I can have an idea about something, and I could approach you and say, I have this idea. And you could say, yeah. So what does that mean? And if I don't say to you, do you think that's a good idea? And you could come back and say to me, well, I don't know about that, but what about this? And if I say, yes, but if I said to you, I want to do my idea, right, I want you to join me so I can do my idea, that's not working in partnership. That's getting you to do my work. Really, the time is really spent on developing a shared agenda and then being able to action the ideas. Because sometimes what happens in communities is they get stuck. Everybody comes up with a lot of ideas, and you put a lot of stuff on the table. And there are two things that happen. One is that you end up thinking that it has to be one big idea. And it only comes together if it's one big idea. And as John was explaining to you, in terms of what they've done in Lanesborough, often it's a slew of ideas. It's like creating a force field of ideas that you can move forward bit by bit. And in that way, change happens. So that it's the willingness to be able to kind of sort that out and sift through the priorities and do what can be done rather than what seems to be impossible. Because that's where people get stuck. It's like, that's so far out. If we're going to do that and that's not going to happen in 10 years, I'm out of here. And I don't blame people when they say that. It's like, what can be done immediately? What's a little further out that we've got to work on, that we keep our eyes on the prize? What's the carrot? And then what's further out still? And how will we know that we've gotten where we wanted to be? So a partnership, working collaboratively, working in a consortium or coalition or whatever, is really about sharing the work, really sharing the work. And it's about staying at the table. So you have to have a very clear purpose. You have to have skin in the game. And there has to be a process which is transparent so that people who aren't sitting around the table can be informed and engaged on an ongoing basis. You have to be accountable. So if people say to you, why are you doing that? You know why you're doing it. And there's an agreement about why you're doing it. And then there has to be a repartee involved. There has to be a lively debate, ongoing debate that's about ideas that feel energizing, that don't feel like a drain. Because that's too tiring and too exhausting, and we're too busy. So next slide. I'm finishing there. So the benefits. Well, I think there's a lot to gain by working with other people and helping to understand other people. Relationship building. Breaking down barriers, maximizing the use of scarce resources. Oh, let's talk a bit about resources, because in small communities there isn't, for our non-profits and for artists who want to do work, finding the money to do it is difficult, and often it feels competitive. But again, I'll go back to there's power in coming together and figuring out how to find the resources, not just locally, but beyond the community, to be able to go after what it is you want to do. So, and working together, instead of one brain or two brains, you bring a lot of people into the room and ask them for their idea about what change would be like or what matters to them. Then you're broadening how to come at what it is you want to do. So increased communication, that's an obvious one. And problem solving. Because this is about solving a sort of set of problems. It's like bowling. You really want to shoot those 9 pins down. There are a few things that sort of struck me in terms of this community. I think that with all the components in place, you have a real opportunity here. I was astonished to realize that 650,000 people stop at the Guildford Welcome Centre. How many of them come here? And how do you know? And when they hear, how much money are they spending? 24 million people visit Massachusetts on a yearly basis from someplace else. How many of them come here? And how do you know? And how much money do they spend? People will go where they're directed to go. I mean, people will, you know those travel articles that start off, I shouldn't really tell you about this place, but, and then they tell you all about it, and you go, oh my gosh. The conundrum for communities is, if we want people to know about us, to what extent, and then how do we, what's our comfort level around having all these strangers on our main street, and how do we deal with that? And effectively, what happens for the most part is that communities, the ambivalence comes across, and we don't, and in doing that, there are two things that happen. Firstly, you don't make as much money as you might, and secondly, you don't manage it. It's not managed, and you can manage having visitors and when. It doesn't mean that you have to tell everybody about the places that are secret to you. We were talking about this last night. There are places in the woods here that probably have a waterfall or two that would take me 20 years to find, unless somebody told me about it in advance. You always have a choice about where you go. Does anybody know Acoma in New Mexico? Acoma is a pueblo on top of a mesa, and it's an extraordinary heritage site, extraordinary place. And if you ever get the opportunity to go, I recommend it. It will knock your socks off. The tribe that owns that mesa, it's not, for the most part, lived in anymore, manages the amount of visitors they allow up to the top of the mesa on a yearly basis. And they allow 375,000 people to visit the mesa every year, and that's it. And with the money that people spend, they maintain that heritage site. So that, you know, when you think about people that come from someplace else, to borrow what it is you have here for half a day, over a weekend, or a week, or whatever it is they're doing, then think about it in terms of their investing in the community that you call home. And in doing that, I would urge you to figure out how to tell your story and how to put out the welcome mat for them. And I'm going to stop there. So thank you. Thank you.
For two reasons. I'm going to encourage people to get up and have a quick stretch and maybe grab something to drink. And
But I have a question for you. So, how many of you here this morning know more than 10 people in this room? Okay.
More than 10?
More than 10?
Yeah.
Okay. How many people in this room know more than 20 people?
are there more than 20?
Yes, there are more than 20.
What do you define as no?
Probably.
I know just about
How many people here know only, you know, a couple of people? All right, okay, so the challenge, you know, and this is the homework, because there's always homework. The challenge is that you either reintroduce yourself or introduce yourself before you leave today to someone you don't know. Okay? That's what I would ask you to do.
That's great.
Thank
Mary.
you.
And thank you for reminding me. Okay. While I'm on that question,
You know, just to jump or to build on that, then there's the other way to look at it is the sort of usual suspect syndrome. Is the challenges for this group to grow the group to new folks, like the couple of people that are here for the first time.
yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thank you, Constantine, so everyone knows who you are now. And to help us, actually, I'll put in a plug very quickly for two aspects of this. One is a sign-in sheet went around, and it's got space for your contact details, email and phone number. And then we maintain a website for this project, and it's www.brattleboroarts.org, and it's got podcasts or video feeds of previous panel sessions. It's got lots of information, background information about the project itself. It's got links to a bunch of other places. It's got bios and background information for the speakers today and previous panel sessions. It contains a host of information, and it's hosted by our office. So it's connected basically to the town website. So even if you just Google Brattleboro Arts, you'll get the website. So if you're on the sign-up sheet, what we'll do, without your permission, well, you've given us your permission because you put your email address down, we'll start pumping you with email information about the activities of the project. So with all that in mind, and if you've got questions about how to get in touch with people from this session or past sessions, or you want to make some kind of connection, feel free to email us and we can try and facilitate that link. So, very happy to introduce Steve Proctor again, and Steve's going to give us the local dimension. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Just a word about my bio. I did not write that I'm a wildly successful potter. I do not know what he who shall not be named had in mind when he wrote that. Just that clarification. Oxymoron, yes, thank you.
Is it mildly successful, or just, we're talking about matters of degree?
So, when Zan and I first started talking about this project, we started from this assumption that there are all these missed opportunities for partnership and collaboration and cooperation. And it's true that every week I'm aware of another missed opportunity. But I decided, well, why don't I start looking at the half of the glass that's full instead of the half of the glass that's empty, and see if there's anything to be learned from the 3 or 4 collaborative endeavors that have succeeded, and what might be learned from them. So I started thinking of that handful of things. I thought of Brattleboro Clayworks, which started as a cooperative, and then I thought, well, the Latchis project is really a cooperative, both the way it was begun and the connection with Preservation Trust of Vermont. And then there's Right Action. That's an interesting one. What about Open Music Collective? And then Vermont Performance Lab. They're great collaborators in a lot of ways. Wyndham Art Gallery, my God, fixture of Main Street for 20 years. And the list went on and on. Cotton Mill Open Studio, Putney Craft Tour, Rock River Arts, Brattleboro West Arts, Cherry Street Artisans, Fulcrum Arts, Next Stage, right up the road in Putney. And I realized maybe this assumption I'm starting with is not the right assumption. That partnership and collaboration and cooperation is not happening here in Brattleboro. And so I wound up surprised and impressed with the degree to which artist-driven cooperatives have succeeded and have made a big difference to the cultural life of the town. I also wound up thinking that some of these success stories could provide encouragement and inspiration, and that some recurrent patterns and themes might emerge from looking at these, and some of them have been distilled already in what John and Mary were talking about. And then finally, I wondered how we could apply some of these lessons that we can extract from these successful cooperatives to foster more and more successful collaborations, both within the arts and building on what we already have across sectors. So I thought what I'd do is give you little thumbnail sketches of 8 of these almost 24 cooperative projects I thought of, hoping that some interesting themes might occur, some inspiration might happen, and we'd get ideas how we could build on what we've got already. I talked with a lot of people to prepare this, and please forgive me if I get some of the details wrong in what I talk about. I'm trying to give sort of just quick thumbnails of several of these projects. So one of them, the one I want to start with, is talking about Wyndham Art Gallery, the late lamented Wyndham Art Gallery. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of many of these projects, because the chemistry and the processes through which they arose, I think, are instructive and interesting. So, Arts Council of Wyndham County Board sent out invites to a handful of artists in 1988 to brainstorm possibilities for some sort of way for artists to show and market their work. And the response was pretty extraordinary. How many people showed up, responded, PD?
Starting out?
Yeah.
30 or 40, we ended up opening 65 hours.
30 or 40 people responded, and a couple of years later, by the time the gallery opened, 65 artists belonged to this cooperative gallery. Variety of skills within the membership and levels of expertise. It opened in '89 and ran for 20 years at various locations downtown, winding up on Main Street. And when I came to town, was pretty much a staple of the presence of the visual arts community in this community. So 20 years running as a cooperative gallery is a pretty nice run. 5 years ago or so, due to a number of changing circumstances, economy, real estate, personnel, et cetera, the gallery closed. But I think there's a legacy of information from that, and as with many of these projects, an ongoing evolution. PD, who is one of the principals in that project, and her husband are now in the process of starting a new gallery, which is going to be some combination of cooperative commercial, an interesting evolution of that idea. So Wyndham Art Gallery, one example of an interesting collaboration involving, as we know, more than 60 artists. Brattleboro Clayworks, another one I know. So a poster was put out, 30 years ago, something like that?
1981.
1981. A dozen potters responded. There was 1.5 to 2 years of conversations, research of similar cooperative endeavors, shift in participants as a core group emerged with a vision for what this cooperative clay studio might look like. As I was thinking about this, I think of the kid's story I used to read about the Ship of Fools, and you have this unlikely collection of characters, each of whom has some particular attribute or skill that, of course, contributes to the eventual success of the project. And in this case, you had the guy who knew how to build a kill, you had a bylaw freak, you had a bookkeeper, you had somebody who was a good, friendly face to the community, and then you had a couple of people who were just mules and willing to do a lot of work. So over time, a space emerged that became home for Brattleboro Clay Works. I talked with one of the founders who described negotiation and process as a path. And when Mary was talking about East Hampton and these potters meeting 3 hours at 2-week intervals to sustain the project, that's one of the keys to successful projects. And this group of people, the ones who remained, had a high tolerance for process and negotiation. And Clayworks continues to operate today. It has changed over time. It started as a group of 8 potters, some of whom were professionals, some of whom were enthusiasts. A number of potters moved through to establish their own studios. Over time, in response to the changing membership and changing circumstances, the organization morphed with it, and it became an incubator for new artists, one of them being me, an education center where classes are offered regularly, and a resource for enthusiast potters for recreation and tournament studio space. It also, in its maturity, has become more and more connected with the non-arts community around it. It has hosted classes for the community college, for the community high school, and has a huge public profile for the Empty Bowls dinner, through which hundreds of potters contribute bowls, and between $20,000 and $30,000 is raised for Morningside Shelter.
The drop-in center.
The drop-in center. Thank you. So that's Brattleboro Clayworks, another example of a pretty amazing and durable cooperative that has morphed over time. A more recent example, Brattleboro West Arts, initiated by a handful of artists who invited others to expand the conversation. And on the public face of it, it looks pretty similar to 2 enormously successful artist cooperatives, Putney Craft Tour and Rock River Artists, both now long-established craft tours that for some of the participants is a real staple of their livelihood and is a big draw for people from across New England, craft lovers. Brattleboro West Arts has some interesting other social and professional development components that are not so visible to the general public. A staple of the organization is monthly potlucks, through which the artists get together, check in on their businesses, and there's often an element of discussion and sort of professional development or technical assistance, people sharing information and resources. It's an organization that's defined in part by its geographic identity, west of I-91, Whetstone Watershed, and few enough people so we can all get in the same house at the same time to have our potlucks and get together. And an interesting aspect of that organization that seems somewhat unusual. A range of level of participants in terms of artistic and professional development, and it's very responsive to ideas. One thing that happened on 2 weeks' notice this last December was they were able to put up a very impressive pop-up show in downtown Brattleboro and catch some of the holiday gift-buying dollars that were flying around. So Brattleboro West Arts, another example of an artist cooperative that is serving the 36 or so artists who are part of it very well indeed. Right Action, a group of writers. This is something that, like many of these organizations, emerged out of a perceived community need. In this case, a couple of benefit events for a writer who needed help. A bunch of the local writers got together, staged a couple of readings, realized that there's a huge hunger for connection among these people who are working in isolation and a need for professional development. And so it now supports a number of critique groups, occasional publications of writers' work, and a pretty high profile of public readings, both throughout the year and as part of the Brattleboro Literary Festival. So those are, one other I'll just mention briefly, Cherry Street Artisans, again a recent pop-up that, like Brattleboro West Art, started with conversations among a couple of artists, expanded to a larger group of a dozen or so, and now it supports a very vigorous holiday sale every year in a beautiful Victorian home in Brattleboro. So all examples of grassroots initiatives that in some cases turned into organizations and in some cases served particular business needs of the artists involved. So I want to shift a little bit from these endeavors that are centered around individual artists to endeavors that are a little bit more organizationally oriented. And one that people often don't think of is Brattleboro Music Center, which once upon a time was a bunch of separate organizations that came together saying, we have common interests, we can do our work more efficiently with shared staff and shared space. And those separate organizations were the Blanche Moïse Chorale, New England Bach Festival, also associated with the founder Blanche Moïse, the Brattleboro Concert Choir, the Wyndham Orchestra, a community music school, and a chamber series. And so all those things came together and now continue to operate under the banner of Brattleboro Music Center as its umbrella. And to a certain extent, it's a single foundation, and to a certain extent, it's a federation of programs that keep some measure of their own identity, and in some cases, their own sub-boards. It's very interesting when funders say, we want to see collaboration, and you have to go to them and say, well, remember, this entity already is a collaboration. One of the amazing things about that collaboration is the cumulative presence and footprint far exceeds the individual impact and traction any of those organizations could have, both as a service entity or as a fundable entity. So the music school serves 400 people. There are 200 participants in the various performing ensembles. There are 40 concerts a year. About 10,000 public person contacts per year happen through this cumulative effort of the Brattleboro Music Center. And in a certain sense, the Music Center is so much a part of town, it's invisible to many people. 10 years or so, the National Service Organization for Community Schools did a report on community schools of the arts with the really interesting and telling title, Too Intrinsic for Renown, was the title of the report. And in a certain sense, the Music Center has that. It's so much a part of Brattleboro's identity, it's easy for people to forget that it's there. Another organization in town that is often that people neglect as a collaborative or cooperative of sorts is the museum. And it's a collaborative largely between the town and the arts world. As some of you may know, in the early 70s, the train station was abandoned and derelict and actually slated for demolition. And thank God a handful of downtown-minded citizens got together and said, maybe, having witnessed the destruction of an absolutely beautiful Carnegie Library, which was replaced by the non-entity of our federal building and post office, saying, we can't let that happen again. We must save this building. So it was owned by the town, and these people opened it as a museum that was partly a train museum, partly a history museum, partly an art museum. In 1972, they rent the building from the town for $1 a year. And there's been an interesting evolution of the museum's identity over that time into the contemporary art museum that it is today. And it partners on a project-by-project basis with various arts and non-arts organizations, but as it seeks to establish itself as a regional destination that's absolutely ripe to be involved in the kinds of conversations that are going on here right now. Another organizational project I'd like to mention, which was not founded out of a collaborative mindset, but operates at a very high level of collaboration and partnership, is Vermont Performance Lab. Vermont Performance Lab is devoted to helping artists helping contemporary performance artists, many in dance and theater, create new work in the context of community. It's a somewhat unusual idea, and the founder, Sarah Coffey, is uniquely well-suited to pull it off. Her MO is to bring in an artist who she thinks may be able to interact with a community or a community issue. And I'll talk about one specific project that illustrates that. She was in love with the work of an LA-based choreographer named Victoria Marks, who has done a number of dance films, some of them based on her technique that she calls action conversations, through which she brings together groups of people who maybe had nothing to do with each other before or don't have a common language, and helping them through movement find ways to connect with each other and explore who they are and who they might be together. So the question was, here's Vic Marks with this interesting thing. Here is Robert McBride and Rockingham Arts and Museum Project in Bellows Falls. And how do we put them together? And so Sarah and Vic began this interesting process of interrogation of the community. What questions are there in the community? What's going on in town? What are the issues? Who's left out? Who might be brought in? It was a very interesting, extended conversation over many, many months and a series of visits with Vic coming to town. It involved the town of Rockingham. It involved RAMP. It wound up involving youth services of Windham County because we realized that an interesting thing going on there is there's a group of marginalized young women, many of them young mothers, who are really at the periphery of the life of the town, socially, economically, culturally. And so the project revolved around getting half a dozen of these young women and half a dozen women who were established in professions and the town life together and working for 5 weeks over the course of a summer on developing a choreographic practice together, developing a piece, and working with a filmmaker, filming the resultant process. The culminating event of that summer was some of the film footage shown, the participants being in the Bellows Falls Opera House, 120 people from the community attending, a very moving culmination to that project. Vic Marks will be coming back within the next couple of months to show the finished product of the film in Bellows Falls. So an example of a deep collaboration that arises out of the need of the community and how that interacts with the artistic resources that can be brought to bear on it. The final collaborative process I'll talk about is the one we're sitting in right now, the Latchis, and how it came to be that this is a community asset rather than has been cut up into a commercial multiplex as was one of its potential futures in the year 2000. In about 1999, a handful of people who were, some of them actors looking for theaters, some of them visual artists, put out a notice in the paper announcing a meeting to talk about the needs of artists in Brattleboro. And to everybody's great surprise, 60 people showed up to this meeting. And several themes emerged from that meeting: space, the need for space for the arts, to show, present, promote the arts, was at the top of the list, along with information sharing, calendaring, ticketing. But the space component of it morphed into a smaller subgroup that came to be known as Brattleboro Arts Initiative. And the mission of Brattleboro Arts Initiative was to develop and promote spaces for the presentation of the arts. And they were a year and a half or 2 years into inventorying town spaces when Spiro and Elizabeth Latchis, who at that time were operating and running this whole building, decided they'd had enough of it and were looking for a way out. And fortunately, they had done some work with Preservation Trust of Vermont. And Brattleboro Arts Initiative was able to connect with Preservation Trust of Vermont and come up with a plan through which BAI would try to mount a campaign to purchase the building on behalf of the town and the arts community. And Preservation Trust, which had an interest in the historic preservation and in vitality of downtown life, brought an enormous amount of technical resources, thinking about structuring the business to make it work, government money, grant money to help make the capital campaign purchase possible, that enabled the purchase of the Latchis 10 years ago this year. So it's a remarkable, I think, grassroots story of putting word out, we need help, what are we going to do with the arts, and for presenting the arts. An opportunity arises, and then the group is able to partner with another entity that brings in the resources needed to make it happen. And I would say that now that it is happening, it's a very interesting collaboration of the nonprofit mission of Latchis Arts, now renamed, and its subgroup, Latchis Corporation, that runs the businesses of the Latchis and is responsible for keeping the revenue generated not only to sustain the building, but also to put money into the arts mission of the project as well. So since that purchase 10 years ago, something like $2 million has been invested in the building. Some of that, alas, in response to Irene, nearly $500,000. Nearly $500,000 recently went into renovation of the seats and ceilings here. And Latchis is now involved in a long-range planning process that's trying to engage a wider community in whatever the next project will be and new ways the Latchis can be interacting with the town at large. So as I look at those stories, I see certain recurrent themes and ideas coming up again and again. And I'd be interested to hear from you all what some of those themes, what you're hearing as you hear those stories and see these projects happening from your own perspectives, especially in relation to the big picture ideas about how these partnerships and collaborations work as presented by John and Mary.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, everybody. Mary, would you like to... Just as a way of giving some background to the Core Arts project itself, when the three of us, Kate Anderson on the Town Arts Committee, myself, and Zon Istis over there in the corner, got together and organized some fairly large-scale and well-attended meetings when this grant opportunity came out. What we established was a sort of a broad interest amongst the arts sector to pursue the grant, and some themes and issues that many people in that sector felt were vital to pursue. And then one of the things that we had as a slightly more intimate concern was that we were aware of Brattleboro's reputation as an arts destination and as an artistic community, but we felt on some level a little bit nervous, I guess is the right word, because it always seemed like a form of external validation, and we were wondering like how that balanced off with our experience of how much activity or how much energy was present locally. And so we always had this sort of funny insecurity almost about the external measurement of Brattleboro's presence as an artistic community or as a destination versus what we were concerned about might be a slightly different reality. And so I think in the process of working through the grant, and particularly listening to the three of you this morning, what I'm struck by is the need to be much more attentive to celebrating our successes and recording our history. So I feel like in each instance, the stories that you've been able to tell, and particularly listening to Steve again, it's astounding to me the richness of the history, and there's obviously much more detail behind Steve's summary, I guess. And so what I wanted to try and get at as sort of the kickoff question was to first of all identify the importance, if you like, of that external recognition as a part of the validation process, but then ask each of you to follow up on the realities of the day-to-day experience of being involved in managing and maintaining, arts organizations, just the brutal reality of keeping it going. And then how you find time to identify with the broader themes or issues that the community is experiencing, and remember to celebrate and record not just the successes, I guess, but the experience of the sector. So, John, you want to?
So that's like about
kick off
4 days worth of questions. just so you know.
4 sentences.
Okay. Yes, yes, no, yes, maybe.
Okay.
I think starting off with the one comment you made just about the validation part. I mean, I guess, and that way maybe towns in Vermont and Minnesota have some similarities in terms of maybe being modest or humble or not wanting to seem like you're bragging about things. It's very Minnesotan. But I was just, I think during the break, talked with Mary a little bit about some of my background as well. And part of it was in sales. I'm naturally an introvert. Just prefer kind of one-on-one conversations than like this size of group of people. Yes? A little louder. I'll project out more.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So just having a perspective of, okay, sales. I mean, I've sold things. I have a sales background, entrepreneurship background, starting up businesses and so forth. So, for instance, in Lanesboro, for something specific, looking at one of the challenges of Lanesboro of being maybe a little bit disorganized about how they're promoting the community. When I moved there in 2000, there wasn't a Chamber of Commerce. There was something called ACT. There was an organization. It stood for Agriculture, Commerce, and Tourism. Now, you might see the challenge of something called ACT when there's 2 theaters in town, that people might get a little confused, and people were. And so the first thing I did when I got on the ACT board was say, why don't we make a chamber to focus it less on these things and more on promotion of the community and shifting it to a civic kind of discussion and paradigm about how we're moving forward. So that was able to change, and the mindset of the community started to change too, very, very subtly in how it's promoted. So now there's 1 full-time staff, several part-time staff with the chamber, and it's about promoting the community through these developments of shared visions and mission statements with the city, the chamber, and arts organizations. So we're actively promoting Lanesboro. Part of our marketing strategy is also marketing to travel writers so that they can write about the community, and to have that branding and to have that kind of messaging so that when the city of Lanesboro gets a call from someone, there's sort of a team together to talk about the PR of it. So that maybe answers one part of your question.
I'm going to respond to this a little bit differently.
Yeah, great.
And talk about sort of what happens when people arrive from another planet, because that's sometimes how it feels. So here's my take on this. The most important thing artists do is make their work, and make their work from their heart. whether or not they're a visual artist or a performing artist or whatever discipline they're working on. That is the most important thing and cultivating an environment in which that can happen and happen well, is pretty fundamental. And you've done that here, and evidently you've done that over and over again, and you've done that between each other and for each other, and that's really to be applauded. That's not coincidental to this particular place. There's something, maybe it's something to do with the confluence of the rivers, but there's something that's happened here that I think is, that speaks volumes about tolerance and the ability for people to be creative and to experience creativity and be engaged in it. The second question that comes up for me is, if you're creating work, who are you doing it for? And I see it as a sort of ripple in a pond effect. So if you're doing it for yourself, and you want to share it, who do you share it with? And the first out is usually your family and friends. And then it goes further out from that. It gets to people you don't know, people in the community. So thinking about this issue of who the audience is for work is really important. And I can't stress that enough. So that if it's from people right here in Brattleboro, what does that mean to bring this community together? Then if it's from people surrounding this place, and broader until it involves people from New York City or Shanghai or Dublin or London or whoever is going to turn up here. And then when we make an effort and put ourselves out there, sometimes I think the knee-jerk response is when we're recognized as what we are, it takes us by surprise. It catches us out in a way, in a peculiar sort of way. And then the instinct is to sort of run back and hide. It's like, we didn't mean it like that. We didn't want to be on this list of 20 best small art towns by the Smithsonian. What are they thinking? And so what happens is you don't do anything with it. You don't take advantage of that kind of, that kind of grand position to be able to say something about that in terms of who you are. So again, for me, it comes back to sort of the story that you want to tell about this moment in time, and what you want to do in the next 5 or 10 years in relation to this community, so that it's keeping sort of front and center an understanding of what actually is happening here, what matters to each of you individually about how this gets done, and then understanding who it is that's turning up on your doorstep and why they are. Because if you don't know or understand much about your visitors, then you're never going to be able to design an agenda that sort of adds up and makes sense. Even if you're sitting there thinking, well, I just want people to enjoy my work, I don't care about the money or whatever, even if it's that. And in that sense, we move from a sort of fragile, rather self-conscious way of thinking to something much more intentional and ultimately much more cohesive. Does that make sense?
I think just playing out that too, of how internally you view your community.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the story
Yeah.
about the Pueblo community, of just the intentionality of
Right.
how they're deciding how that works. Lanesboro has these conversations, continually, and they're good conversations to have. It's a tourism-based community, it's an arts community, but when I talk with our board of directors, I've said, with the Arts Campus project, what we're doing now, that this has to work on 3 different levels. The first level that it has to work on is locally. What in the community? I mean, this has to benefit people in the community. That's why the historic walking bridge, saving that part of your history is just so important, because once it's gone, it's gone. And so it has to work on that level. And then what is your audience? So for us, it has to work regionally and defining what that region is. And then also nationally. We want it to work nationally so that people can visit the communities, so that can help the economy. So there's a real consciousness about what it is. And there's also a consciousness of what people don't want in Waynesboro. You're not going to see franchises. There aren't any. There's not McDonald's. There's not Burger King. It's not permitted. You know, you're also not going to see a billboard. One, the town's pretty small, but two, there's zoning ordinances against the size of sign you can have even on your storefront, and there's a historic district in the community. So there's an intentionality there.
Right.
But just knowing the community that you're in and, you know, honoring people's wishes, but also an intentionality of where you want to be. You know, where is that vision? Where do you want to go? And how can you do that with as many voices as possible?
Yeah.
It's challenging, but
It is
you're
challenging.
asking the exact right questions.
How many of you have one of these? How many of you have a smartphone? Okay. So how many of you are resisting getting a smartphone? There you go. So here's the thing. Here's what's going on in this country right now. 52% of the population have one of these. And it crosses socioeconomic lines. It's not all for wealthy people. This is where they're getting information, right here in their hand. This is the people are managing their money, they're managing their relationships, you know, they're managing where they go, how they go, what they do when they get there, from a distance, from close up, you know, it's here. Now, whatever we think about that, whatever attitude we have about that, you know, if somebody turns up in Brattleboro, they may have done it through this, and they may have done it because they were influenced by something that someone else wrote or put in place about this place. You know, they turn up because they've found out about something that's going on here that intrigues them and excites them, and they want to borrow it. They want to experience it for themselves. And in a sense, that's what we're offering to anyone, community, whether they're in the community or not. They're from someplace else. Is an experience. It's this quality of life piece that we've been talking about.
I think it ties in with your first question, Rod, about the importance of recognition. There's an internal value to the recognition in terms of how the organizations in town and the artists in town perceive the world of possibilities. And there's this little change in self-image that happens when you get that kind of affirmation and pat on the back and sort of encouragement to go farther in that direction. There's also the recognition from the outside, as you're saying. We were comparing notes last night about our recent experiences traveling with our teenager and 20-something kid who's guiding the tour from their smartphone and finding the cool restaurants and finding the funky happenings. And so the recognition that's happening, you know, both through the Smithsonian on the one hand and also through TripAdvisor on the other is really important to what's going to happen in town, who's going to come, and how we're going to think of ourselves. And in terms of the reality, did you want to follow up on that?
So the three most used social media sites right now are Facebook, no surprise, Facebook, billions, Twitter, and Twitter is used by a younger demographic because it's faster. Think about that for a moment. Oh my God. And Pinterest. Who knew Pinterest would rise to the top in terms of what people like?
Pinterest, where you basically pin an image and comment on the image. Pinterest. As in
It's all
pin
images.
and interest.
Sorry, Steve.
That's right. Great. So you were also asking about the realities of day-to-day and how that meshes with or gets in the way of finding the larger vision. And I would say a couple things. And the examples I was talking about, I didn't have time to get into the interaction between a kind of collective grassroots movement and the handful of instigators that were involved in every case. And interestingly, who resurface as the thing morphs into a new endeavor. How Wyndham Art Gallery is going to have, in some senses, a successor in Mitchell Giddings' Fine Art, where one of the principals is starting a gallery that's going to be partially cooperative, partially commercial. Or how Brattleboro Clay Works One of the founders becomes the founder of Cherry Street Artisans. And another interesting cooperative arts thing I didn't mention, Paint the Pavement, a neighborhood project to decorate the street. So it's interesting how certain players who have this kind of disposition keep finding new ways in which to seed the conversations and put things in motion. And how do you find time, and how do you record the experience? I mean, there is an advantage to ignorance. Everyone I know who has launched into one of these big projects, like taking on BAI, this motley ragtag group of theater buffs, let's say, wind up taking on this multi-million-dollar project, and they're all saying a year into it, oh my God, if we'd known what we were getting into, we never would have attempted this. But by then, you're so far in, and you've brought in other people who are on board and want to see it through, that the project takes on a life of its own, thank God.
That's absolutely true. I would say that, of all the partnership projects I work with, all of them say that at some point or another. And there is a sort of life cycle that I've noticed over time, for projects that have been going for some time. That first year, everything is done on sheer energy. Everybody's involved. It's all kind of like hectic and busy, and the conversations are really, fantastic, and everybody walks away going, wow, I can't believe we pulled that off. And then there's this sort of second year, it's like, we're going to do this again. Seriously, we're going to do this again? We're going to do it, but I put all my, we are, and some people will leave at that point because they don't have the capacity to continue. They don't have the interest change. Being able to be flexible in your response to the way that projects work avoids disappointment about who's in, who's out, as long as you're never making it an exclusive process. The problem in a lot of communities is it is actually, I don't know who said it earlier today, it's the usual suspects. I worked with a community recently, and we were talking about volunteering. And it was a volunteer-based community. Town government was volunteer for the most part. When you talk to somebody who sort of turns up to work on a partnership, usually they're involved in 3 or 4 other things as well. They've made themselves available in that sense to the community. So what we discovered, there were about 40 people volunteering on behalf of 12,000. Because it's a community that's about the same size.
Sometimes we're just 36.
Right. So what do you do about that? And I think that you seriously have to look at the impediments to people getting engaged in activities.
I just
want
want
to talk about
play
that?
up that too. Just from a organizational struggle process type of thing, we've got now about 4 full-time equivalent for our organization. The town has a population of 750. Our volunteer base is 185.
Wow.
So, and when the first time we applied for a grant with that number, we got a call back like, no, you can't fudge your numbers like that. And I'm like, no, well, here's what we do. And the reason why that number is so high is because we engage different community members for different programs and projects. So because we volunteer at the Fish Fry, because we volunteer at Buffalo Bill Day, because we have Art in the Park Festival now that has a total independent volunteer coordinator who coordinates 20 other volunteers just for that. Our fundraiser has a huge amount of volunteers. So altogether, one volunteer might not, well, I'm not interested in Art in the Park because I do this, but, I volunteered to bring art into the schools because that's what I'm interested in. So you look at what people are most engaged with and try to bring them together. And then also just respecting the morphing process that you talked about. Lanesboro started as Lanesboro Art Council because people wanted to put on an Art in the Park festival. That allowed it to get other people in the community to buy in. It spawned the Commonweal Theater Company because they said, for $1 a year, you can use this space. Well, because Commonweal only got charged $1 a year, they were able to build a $2 million facility right next door. They also helped spawn Cornucopia Art Center, which started out as a cooperative gallery, and now is Lanesboro Art Center. So these things can evolve, and Lanesboro Art Council then merged with Cornucopia to become the Lanesboro Art Center, years later. So it's okay. It's a natural process of communicating, within your community, and that can yield, I think, great success.
I think it's a natural process, but it's also a process. I mean, every one of these things is a little birth, and there's an infusion of extra energy that's required to make that structural shift, or in some cases a paradigm shift of, how do we get off paper and thinking about this, or how do we reach kids who are interacting with the world through this when we're used to giving concerts where they're expected to sit with their hands folded on their laps. So I think one of the struggles, you asked about the realities of day-to-day, is getting people who are working so hard to keep their little boats afloat as they are to see that, forget the boat analogy, or let's say sawing the tree down with this really dull saw and taking the time to stop.
That's not a metaphor, that's actually what we do.
And file it, and realizing that there may be a better way to do this. And how do you create the circumstances that make that attractive enough, and where there's immediate enough a payback to justify their coming to a meeting on a Saturday morning or spending the 3 hours a week every 2 weeks around the table.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, we're going to try and move that out here a little bit. So one more, and then.
So I would say that you came here probably because you were curious about what was going to happen. You might have been in rooms and had these conversations before, but today you're here, and that's fantastic. The question is what will keep you in this conversation? And I believe that it's because you will stay in the conversation as long as you feel as though you're going to get something out of it that will benefit you, and that's perfectly okay. And what we forget sometimes is that we having skin in the game, and telling people what it is you need and you want and you would like to see happen is a really important part of this kind of conversation. And then seeing whether or not out of that comes a common purpose. Because anything you do that involves sort of moving this forward is about actually identifying why. Why do it anyway? What is this about? What is it we're doing here? And with that, then you've got a better chance of being able to sustain the conversation over the long term. And these questions are ones that should be revisited often and regularly, because it changes. It doesn't necessarily stay the same. There are so many policies or strategies or committees that are put together that last much longer than they actually need to, or whose goals aren't revisited. And you find yourself 3 years into something and it's like, why am I here? It needs to. It needs to be a vein that is continually sort of. It's like fine wine, It's fine for it to age over time, but you better enjoy drinking it. The point where you open the bottle.
Okay, so just going to take a quick editorial moment here. Listening to the answers here, and before I throw it out to you, I'm struck by the parallels or the similarities with my experience inside town government, and then also my limited but long-term involvement with some local business startups. So even the recognition from Steve and from Mary that if you had have known what you were going to get into, in year 2, you probably never would have signed on for year 1. Some of our most successful startups in Brattleboro, and we've got a couple that are just, one in particular that's just outstanding. I don't think when we as a town, with a very loose group of professionals, very eager to facilitate economic development of any kind, had any conception of when we started working with this small group of people led by 2 very young people that were complete strangers to the area and to us, that within the space of 5 years they'd be contemplating tripling their employee numbers and tripling their output in a very competitive retail sector that happens to be a quintessentially Vermont product. So what I want to say is that the lessons or the insights that we're gaining and listening to here from the arts sector, for me, remind me exactly of other walks of life or other worlds. So on that note, let me open it up to the audience and take some questions for our panelists.
So
Brenda.
I'm Brenda Siegel. I'm a dancer in our community, and I asked this question last time, but I find actually dance to be highly non-collaborative at lots of times, and I disagree. So I feel like I'm sometimes alone there, and so I wear two hats. I started the Southern Vermont Dance Festival because that frustrated me, and I wanted to have use all the local dance spaces and find some way to pull us all together, and collaborate with the dancers all around New England and bring them here and get people to shop in downtown Brattleboro. So keep it as close to downtown Brattleboro as possible. So that's what that was. But then the rest of the year, while I'm doing that, lots of hours, I also have a dance company with a pre-professional training program with students. And it does not threaten me if my students take classes in multiple studios. I feel like that's actually what they need. However, it does threaten other people, and not just in this community, it's a dance thing. So what I've been trying to figure out is, how do you convince other people, or how do you, I mean, you can't necessarily, but how do you sort of try to bring people into that mindset that actually it'd be better for all of us if we supported our dancers the most we can and got them to the best classes that work for their goals and their lifestyles, so that we can create a collaboration. And there's not so much like, because it's hard to be the, one or two studios that are like, yeah, let's all collaborate, because then you're kind of putting yourself out there on the ledge, So I'm just trying to, I asked this last time, how do you collaborate with people that are competing at you? So, because this one's about collaboration, I thought I'd ask again.
Okay. Anyone want to, I've got a brief, odd response from a different world, but anyone want to take it up immediately?
I have a response. So I started dancing when I was 4 years old. My mother took me because she was not a shy woman, and she decided I was shy, and I needed to be brought out of myself. So I was put into, I was taken off to a dance class, and I fell in love. I mean, it completely. And I danced for years and years, and I still love to dance. So I'll just say that. So I'm a bit biased here. I think that, spending some time thinking about common purpose, what it is you all have in common, and coming up with sort of what that looks like for you. And then I don't think it's necessarily about bringing a whole bunch of people together all at one time. It's a conversation between people, so you can share what it is you're trying to focus on here. And I think the question you ask is always, what if? What if we did something together? What if we did this together? What's the downside of that? What's the upside of it? And I think really, really listening to what feedback you're getting. And if it's defensive one, then figuring out actually what the reasons for that are, so that if there is the possibility to be able to promote you all together, does that elevate your ability to be able to do more? And what does more look like? I think that's, so I really wouldn't give up on it. I think what we tend to do is launch something and it goes, and people go, I don't know. And we sort of say, okay, I'm retreating. I wouldn't give up on it. The city of Melbourne does these dance parties on the street, and thousands of people turn out for it, regular folks. Mass Smoker in North Adams does these dance parties where people turn up, they spend $5 and they come up and they dance. That's all they do. It's just
Well, and the dance festival is highly successful, but
Right.
I can't pull that into the whole year, the collaboration that we all had for that 4 days, and it really is necessary, I think, so that was sort of, I guess I should have added that into my question.
So let's talk about that a bit, because a lot of communities do these big bang events, big bang, and they're gone. I sort of encourage people to think about whether or not, if you're going to do a big festival, how do you kind of create a trickle effect so that in a sense it has a presence all the way through the year. So for instance, you've got this music festival happening today. So are there, enough venues so those musicians locally can have a presence actually in and out of it, so you could find them again through the year? Could you do something on a sort of semi-regular basis that would be within your capacity on a more ongoing basis, so that people kind of can find it? You've got a lot going on here, but I mean, if you organized it enough, you'd be able. I think you'd be able to do something. Also, bringing a discipline under one umbrella helps people organize it in their own minds. So you've got contra dancing going on today someplace as well.
Yes.
So
Right. John or Steve, you want to pick up on that really quickly?
Well,
You don't, no need, you can,
just in a brief thing, because this is something that I've dealt with a lot in Latchis, just because not all organizations have gotten along in the past, and it's been a challenge for our organization just with a separate successful organization, Commonwealth Theater, that because there was $1 a year rent for 20 years, they were able to build their capacity, and the Art Council had no capacity. It was all volunteer-based. And one of the reasons why the Cornucopia Arts Center and the Art Council merged was because negatives and positives added up to something greater than the sum of two smaller organizations. Cornucopia had paid staff. Art Council had no paid staff. But this volunteer base that was 100, we had a volunteer base of 80. Some overlapped. So from what could be perceived as two smaller, weaker organizations became a strong organization. But Commonwealth viewed both as sort of threats. And so, the defensiveness was kind of talked about. So sometimes it takes that conversation. It takes well, if they're threatened by X, talk about it. It's not something that happens overnight. It's taken a long time for us to be active partners with Commonwealth on a lot of different levels, and also just talking about it in your literature and how you promote and how you present yourself in organizations. A recent article that came out in Minnesota mentioned that we wanted to have this as a regional kind of venture. It wasn't just about Latchis. And so now we're partnering with Winona Shakespeare Festival, which is about 45 minutes away, much bigger organization, but they want to partner with us because they see the demographic that comes to Latchis, they want that in Winona. So when you talked about those mutual benefits, it's not just, well, we want to use you to help our program. How can both really work together? And that's a true collaboration. Yeah. Winona Frozen River Film Festival. We've got a great theater to show film. We've got a film screen. And it only seats 120. But when you've got 100 people there in the winter, it's fantastic. So now the premier event for the Winona Frozen River Film Festival is in Latchis. So we just had that event, but it took 3 years of conversation to say, hey, let's have our premiere in Latchis because we get that group now over to Winona. And just last week I found out that the Shakespeare Festival does now winter events. They had 1,200 people show up for one free event, and they want to partner with us. So that's the type of thing where it doesn't happen overnight, but just that kind of ongoing communication and dropping the defensiveness a little bit and just looking at strategically what are those things that we both can add our strengths to. So.
Steve, did you want to add to that?
I wanted to say that the collaborations that are truest and that are the most long-lasting in my experience are where the idea is jointly created. It's sort of a marketing job to take the idea and present it to someone as opposed to sitting down with somebody. The VPL example is a good one. You go to the community or you go to the potential partner and you say, what are the issues? What are your questions? What are the opportunities, and how do they intersect with the questions and issues and opportunities that I'm looking at? And that place of intersection is the fertile ground for getting serious buy-in from another partner.
Right, and my observation would be drawn from family life and business, and so there are very many different forms and ways of constructing collaboration, and I think one version that Steve just mentioned was the so-called strategic alliance. And so when two or more entities can see mutual benefit in acting cooperatively together, and they understand before they start what the split is going to be on the prize, you act together. That's when you're getting up on your parents. There are corporate forms that resemble that all the time. So there are strategic alliances between corporations and businesses that day-to-day compete right across their markets. And then when they can come together mutually and understand that they will mutually benefit from responding to a market in a joint fashion, they'll do it. Sometimes it's a success, sometimes it's not. Internally, with their people, they have massive issues in terms of getting buy-in and understanding because there are two cultures clashing, and there's mistrust and anxiety around actually sharing with a competitor. And so there are certain industries that are actually shaped by collaboration and competition simultaneously. The most famous would be Apple Computers working with IBM for years in their early era, and then how that's evolved. And so you actually see IBM having left personal computers altogether, and Apple's still there. And so that strategic alliance and that licensing stuff goes on all the time. The current issue on a corporate level is, in fact, the incessant suing and countersuing between Samsung and Apple over licensing rights and technology. When they both acknowledge that they've shared things in the past, they're now actually contesting or challenging who's got rights to which piece of technology. And if you open that up, there are components in that thing that are in common with its competitors, right? So there's all sorts of versions, is what I'm trying to illustrate, of strategic alliance or collaboration, and it's not necessarily an issue that you can be both cooperating and competing literally for the same things. In this instance, the customer's dollar at the same time, but you can understand and recognize that there's reasons why you might want to cooperate or collaborate. There is a legal dimension which is called fleecing the public too, but that's a topic for another day. So the point I want to illustrate is, even in our world, there are times that we're at odds with the state. There are times that we're at odds with other communities. There are times when we cooperate because we can both see the benefits of cooperating. There's sometimes when other entities regard Brattleboro's appearance somewhere as a municipal entity as being the big dog in the room, because up against Halifax or something, actually we kind of are. We try to be sensitive to that. There's sometimes when that collaboration doesn't work because of that mistrust or that sort of disconnect, and there's sometimes when that works fine. So, what I'd say in my experience is the clearer you are about what your intentions are, and the clearer and the better understanding you have of what your other parties' needs and interests are, the better able you are to actually identify how that collaboration is going to work. I guess the last one I'd want to mention is, and I don't want to get the history here wrong, but Brattleboro Memorial Hospital is now part of the Dartmouth-Hitchcock network of hospitals, and they're a very late comer to that. At some point earlier on, you would have identified, in fact, that Brattleboro Memorial Hospital was actually competing with the Dartmouth network, and it's now become clear to them that they're better off being inside that network than trying to compete. And I think there's people in the room that could flesh out all sorts of strategic alliances or collaborations in various industries and in various sectors all the time. And I think the local higher ed community is taking very small baby steps at actually collaborating more thoughtfully rather than just pretending that the other doesn't exist, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but might have characterized things 5 to 10 years ago. Okay. So, Michael.
I think Steve did a great job of demonstrating that there's been a lot of collaboration going on for the last 20 or 30 years in the arts. In a way, each of those groups is sort of their own silo. They knew about each other, and there's some crossover, but they're sort of not common marketing. So how important is it to collaborate on sort of one name, one theme, one brand? Is that important to a community?
Yep.
Yeah, yes.
Yep.
I think we're
Yep.
both going to
Yep.
say
Yep.
yes,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then yes some more, and
Absolutely.
then yes on top of that.
Yes.
You can jump in after I get done.
Done saying yes.
Jumping in. This. From New York Mills's perspective, when I was there, we worked with. There was no Chamber of Commerce per se. There was a Civic and Commerce, but there was no visitor center. So the cultural center, the art center, became the visitor center. so we had double duty. In Lanesboro, there was no chamber, so the Art Center helped create a chamber. But one thing that I learned in New York Mills was in setting economic goals through the arts, using publicity as a tool, like a carpenter would use a hammer or a saw. Politicians do it all the time for all sorts of various reasons, but other groups can use it too for an end. So it can work for you, it can work against you. But having a plan for how to use it, things can happen organically, like, oh, you've got something in Smithsonian. Lanesboro had National Geographic at the Rhubarb Festival this summer, and the Rhubarb Festival has just kind of turned into this sort of wonderful, magical thing, one of those big bang one festivals, but it kind of keeps going throughout the year as well, because there's something called the Rhubarb Sisters, and they play at various events, and they're sort of like the Andrew Sisters, except bebop-a-lua my baby, it's bebop-a-lua my rhubarb, you know. So, but the Rhubarb Sisters worked for 3 years to woo Garrison Keillor to come to Lanesboro. The final straw that got Garrison Keillor to do that was they went to the Fitzgerald Theater and all dressed up as rhubarb leaves with rhubarb spelled out. So finally Garrison Keillor said, I give up. This is too much. I'm with you. And so a year later did Prairie Home Companion live from Lanesboro at the softball field. It was absolutely magical. It had 3,000 people packed into a softball field in this teeny tiny town. It got national attention. So, but that was work done, it was strategic, and that was used to help bring other people into the community. And it's just so important to know what your brand is. If you don't have one, you have one anyway.
Yes, exactly.
You know,
Even if you don't know, you have one anyway.
exactly. So
Exactly.
if you want to.
Yeah.
So if you were to think about the marketing budgets for all the organizations that Steve mentioned, they're very small. And the ability for those organizations to get out in the marketplace and do what they need to do is stretched to the absolute limit. So again, it comes back to how do you build capacity in that sort of environment? You know, it doesn't mean, I don't think, that you need to lose your individualism as an organization, actually, or autonomy, in terms of what you want to do and how you want to go about doing it. But in terms of actually putting yourself out there, there was a research piece actually done by the Smithsonian with the travel industry of America several years ago, and it still holds true, because it was definitive in terms of the habits of cultural tourists specifically. And it was the first sort of major study that had been done. And it found that cultural tourists will spend more money and will stay longer because they find out about an activity that they want to participate in advance. So that being able to figure out how to put yourself in front of, what we tend to do is sort of say, I'm the theatre company and I'm moving out here as theatre, but I'm not the only game in town. Think about it. How many of you went on vacation in the past year? You went away someplace else, even if it was the town next door. Okay. So as did I. So I have a range of interests. And sometimes I travel with my kids, sometimes I don't, sometimes I travel with friends, it depends. So, and sometimes I go home, so to the UK. So I like to do different things. We were talking about this a little yesterday. Here's the way it adds up. Culture, heritage, and recreation, or recreation in the environment. Those are the three components that are in play when it comes to visitors. Think about it for yourselves. You might have gone to Newburyport, and you might have gone to the beach, the Maritime Museum. You will have gone out to eat, and maybe you'll go to a concert in the evening. So you've experienced heritage, recreation, you've experienced sort of the culinary arts, and you've also gone to a performing arts event. As a visitor, you didn't differentiate between any of them. For you, it was seamless. It was just a question of being able to figure out actually what there was to do. And what we don't do enough is be able to design itineraries. And I was sort of challenging these guys yesterday to sort of think about that, you know, as a start. If you were to arrive in Brattleboro, what would you do from 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night? Can you make it that seamless and that easy? Americans are leaving 212 million days of vacation time on the table every year. Because the spin is that it's not a good thing to take vacations, even if we pay you to do it, right? We are, you know, you're dealing with a population that is time stretched. They don't have enough time. They're looking for convenience. They're looking for an easy way in. They want a package, so that when you go to a resort, the package is right there. And my God, you know, you're not a resort. You're much more than that. So I think that this is a really important issue, and a really important issue to get your heads around. It really is. There's power in bringing it all together. And that's why the Brattleboro story, I was astonished to find that, you know, your motto is the one and only. I mean, you know, whether you like that or not, you know, wow, what a starting point to be able to be playful about how you want to present yourself to the world and get them to do all those things, because the bottom line is that if they find all those things to do, not just you and your organization, they'll stay longer. And the money will spin within the community. And that will help the government, local government, provide its services, and that will help keep people employed and in this community.
It's the synergy that you're just talking about between those. That's what's working best in Lanesboro, and that communication between those various groups is so important, because they're all going in the same direction. In interviews, I will say, well, people come to Lanesboro for the bike trail and discover the arts. Or they come for the arts and discover, wow, you've got a bike trail. I had no idea there's a bike trail here. Or there's a river. I'm a fisherman. One of the reasons I moved to Lanesboro is I can do art and fish. This is fantastic. So it's world-class trout fishing there. So it's that synergy of all three together, the environment, culture, and the economy, that helps move the community forward.
I was talking with an actor a couple of nights ago, and he said something that really struck me. And he said, you know, in theater, you just have to remember, it's so easy to not go to the theater. It's much easier to not go to the theater. So what is it that's going to get you from in front of the screen or off the couch or out of the house or out of town and to, in this case, Brattleboro? And just remember that it's really easy for somebody to stop at Northampton or to not start out at all. And what is the package that's the critical mass that's going to inspire the movement?
Boyfriend.
All right, so I want to just interject here. It's gone past noon, which is our official kind of end point, and I'm startled to realize that we've reached that already with just a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to take a question quickly from, so people should feel comfortable to go, and if you've got a deadline or you've got something else to do, that's fine. I'm thinking that we're okay here for a little while.
Another 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, so let's take a couple more questions really quickly. So first, right here in the front.
Yeah, hi.
And then you, Jen.
I'm Mary, and I'm a writer, a novelist.
Yeah.
I would like to know, what about the writer, the novelist? Because collaboration, I've seen over the years, so much of the funding collaboration, the funders want collaboration, which I sort of associate a little bit with bullying from the funders. I must admit, I have an attitude, you know. And so what about writers and who need space to work, need to feel settled? Okay, because maybe I think there's a romantic notion about creatives that, a lot of pain and horrible living conditions make for good writing.
No, I completely fundamentally disagree with that. There should be no pain in the creative process. In fact, actually, it should be nurtured, taken care of. It's very, very precious. I mean, that's everything. That's where I live, right there. So, and that's fundamental to the way that
Then
work
it
is
can be called
delivered.
home.
Exactly, it can be called home. For a lot of people who, there are a lot of creative people whose work is not as visible as it might be because their outlets aren't the same as everyone else's. It's not theatre and it's not dance. You're not in front of an audience in the same way. So that what you do with that, when actually the process of making the work is a private one, and it will always be a private one, and that's perfectly fine. I do think there are things you can do. The Boston Book Festival is brand new. It's only 3 years old. And they guesstimate that this year, over 500,000 people came into Boston because of that festival. Yeah. So that, and in process in Boston right now is a literary district that actually is to celebrate the work of writers past and present, because we have a high number of writers. In Franklin County, which is just south of you, Greenfield down to Northampton, there are a lot of small towns, and actually there's a very high density of writers living in those environments, because what they've sought is a kind of isolation, so they can get on and do their work. They don't necessarily want to live in they don't need a studio per se, although some of them do move into that environment. And I think, again, it's deciding if you want to be in public view, how do you manage that? It should always be a managed, it's always worth thinking through, if we want to be visible, to what extent, and how far do we put ourselves out there? And if, we have concerns about being in the marketplace and for our work to be seen, how do we go about doing that? And how do other people working with creatives do that with the utmost respect? Does that make sense? So I think there's always a choice, always a choice. It doesn't mean that you cannot or should not be included in conversations about how to make a living.
Great. Thank you. Dora, really quickly.
Well, just really quick, sort of on an end note, you spoke a lot about sort of common purpose and what the reason would be for coming together, but could you give us some real concrete ideas for organizing and strategizing around being able to honor and respect every individual thing out there and kind of bring them together in a way that, creates this thing that is a common market and works together and has, purpose? Because I think that's where we're stuck. So if you could kind of help us out with ways that have, and how it came about in the other communities where you did that, that would be great.
I've given a few examples, but it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
You need to have that as a goal. Okay, if that's your goal. 15 years ago, when I first moved to Lanesboro, I learned that we were the competition. We were the bait, and someone else was the fish. Mm-hmm. So, just being able to subtly shift that. So, no. What if we're all moving together in the same way? Yeah. It didn't happen overnight. So, part of it is realizing what is that common goal? Where do you have the common ground? First, and it does take some, I think, extraordinary leadership as well. I think you need to identify the leadership. Who are the right people to ask the right questions sometimes as well. In our case, that was the case. I know that that's the end of this, and there's not a real simple, here's how you do it, ABC. There's things that you can do too fast, and you can have pushback from that, maybe doing it too fast. But I think looking at the common ground in the slide that you had up of, here are the things that make successful. That's just textbook in terms of if you follow those sort of guiding principles, your chances of success go exponentially up, right. I
think there are a couple of things. Firstly, if you're going to put a group of people together in a room, you need to establish some ground rules for engagement really quickly. And secondly, I think you need to, and in there, you need to be determined to be honest and respectful of one another, so that you build understanding of what it is, what the conversation is, what the color of the conversation is. And already, I think, what some of the issues are. Mm-hmm. It's just a question of getting them on the table. Yeah. And getting them all on the table. Yes. And not sort of saying, oh, that doesn't belong here. If someone thinks it does, it's up on the table, And then this is like putting a jigsaw together.
You know, it's not going to all come together all at once, and you're not going to resolve anything all at once. But it's being prepared or making the commitment to stay in the conversation and not have a hissy fit about the fact that somebody wants to, you know, sit next to you or whatever it is, that you're going to stay in the conversation. And that in coming to that table, there's parity in the room. No one person is more important than any other in it, regardless of the organization they represent, that you've all got skin in the game. And out of that, you'll grow a common purpose. And sometimes it can boil down to something really simple. So for me, central to any placemaking agenda is the ability for artists and cultural organizations to thrive and shine. That's it, thrive and shine. So right now, what does that look like across the board for the community, the arts community here, first and foremost in Brattleboro? And what are the challenges? And then once you've actually surfaced the issues, then how can you move to a sort of solution-based agenda? And that's not good. It's not the light bulbs don't go on all at once. Sometimes you need to sit with a problem long enough to be able to sort of work it and see where the ideas come to begin to, you know, to ask what-if conversations. What if we tried this? And be prepared to fail at some things too. Not everything comes off the way you might expect, but pick off the things that you can do, you know, and stay at it long enough. This is going to take time, you know. And when everybody is exhausted, it's a bit like going to a party and you eat too much cake. It's like cut yourself some slack, break open a bottle of wine, break bread together, and say, okay, you know, this just by being in this room, by showing up, by having this conversation, by inviting other people continually into the room to be part of this conversation, we make progress. You know, and bit by bit and by degrees you will. You know, so for instance, a couple of communities, so for instance in New Bedford, Massachusetts, their mission is to improve the economic climate in downtown New Bedford, which is, you know, pretty huge undertaking for a clay artist or a, you know, a gallery owner or whatever. It's like, right. Or writer, exactly.
What does
you
it
know.
mean?
But actually, what's happened there is pretty extraordinary. There has been, you know, there are now more artists living in downtown. They've organized themselves, you know, much as John is describing, you know, at the point where artists are involved as part of the solution in some of our community problems and economic problems. So interesting solutions play out in ways that I think are just fabulously creative and really unusual. You know, it's making a beginning. And I think that sometimes a lot of conversation happens, and then the other piece is that people expect somebody to take charge. Yeah. Okay, someone is going to do this. Collaborative efforts are not necessarily about one person. You're lucky if you have one person. Collaborative action is about everybody doing a piece of it and to get the job done. And I think that that's actually ultimately the commitment. So you don't expect the person sitting next to you to do it for you. Because if you've got skin in the game, you're going to do it for yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else got a question or something they want to pursue either with the group or...
We can also stay around for a few minutes and talk one-on-one.
While we clean up.
Let me just say, Terry had raised her hand. She had to leave, but she wanted to just invite everyone so you know that at 1 o'clock there's a pub sing with Tony Barron at McNeil's. So if that appeals to anyone, you want to go down, and I guess it's part of the Northern Harmony thing, I'm guessing. So if that appeals to you, stop by McNeil's at 1 o'clock and have some good time with Tony. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming. Look at our website for upcoming events and the documentation of this. BCTV have kindly participated with us, collaborated with us in filming each one of these panels, and you'll be able to view today's session and previous sessions via our website. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.